Sean Diddy Combs isn't just fighting for his freedom, he's fighting to hold on to his fortune. Forbes now estimates his net worth is $400 million, a significant drop from the $740 million valuation just a few years ago. But that number could shrink even more. Federal prosecutors are moving to seize assets tied to the alleged criminal activity.
It is over. The roar of the bad boy empire has been silenced, replaced by the grim echo of a courtroom. Sean Diddy Combs has not just lost a few million, he has lost the game. His staggering fortune, the one he paraded in front of the world for 3 decades.
Once considered a billionaire with a vodka line, a TV network, and a clothing brand, Sean Combs' fortune has taken a major hit. Forbes estimates his net worth is roughly $400 million, nearly half of what it was just a few years ago. Both his Beverly Hills and Miami mansions were raided in March of 2024 as part of the investigation into his alleged crimes. And that number may continue to drop as Combs faces a federal trial and a Justice Department forfeiture action that could cost him his empire. An empire that prosecutors allege was built, at least in part, through a pattern of criminal activity, including alleged sex trafficking, drug distribution, and violence, all used to advance what they call a racketeering enterprise. In the unsealed indictment, prosecutors outline how his business and personal assets allegedly played a role in carrying out or concealing the crimes. This means any assets connected to the behavior, even indirectly, could be seized, including real estate, companies, vehicles, and aircrafts. Now, his $60 million private jet has reportedly already been sold. The Beverly Hills estate is currently on the market for $61 million. And while Combs still owns his $48 million Miami mansion, a judge denied his request to use it as collateral for bond. In week 2 of testimony, Homeland Security Special Agent Gannon took the stand. Gannon, who helped lead the March raids of Combs' homes, walked jurors through photos of the items seized. Among them, parts of AR-15 style rifles with the serial number scratched off, loaded magazines, a Gucci bag reportedly filled with ketamine and MDMA, and personal items like lingerie and dozens of bottles of baby oil and lubricant. Prosecutors say this evidence is critical to establishing the elements required under federal racketeering laws, helping them show a pattern of alleged crime, criminal behavior used to sustain or conceal the enterprise. In an effort to protect what's left of his assets, Combs hired Stefan Casella, former deputy chief of the Justice Department's asset forfeiture and money laundering section, to fight the forfeiture action. If the jury finds Combs guilty, it will be up to them to determine how much of Combs' assets are subject to forfeiture. Anything forfeited after a conviction could be used to support alleged victims. Sean Combs denies all allegations. And to help us break down what's at stake, I'm joined by Jim Trusty. He's the former chief of the Department of Justice, Organized Crime and Gang Section. Jim, thank you so much for coming on today.
Sure, good to be here.
So, Jim, let's start with the forfeiture. This isn't just about prison time anymore. Prosecutors want his empire. From what you've seen in the filings, how aggressive is this?
Well, it looks to be very aggressive, and there's a couple of reasons I say that. The first is it's very broadly worded. What they're talking about is essentially any property, real or personal, that could constitute either facilitating property or instrumentalities, they call it, or proceeds. And so that's kind of the whole business empire of P. Diddy being at risk. And that's the second part, which is it's a RICO case, a criminal enterprise case, where they've defined the organization, the criminal enterprise, as not just Sean Combs, but as all these business interests that he has, including liquor labels, music labels, everything else you can think of. So they've set it up in a way where when they...
The untouchable has been annihilated. It is a financial descent so catastrophic that it beggars belief the man who was once hip-hop's first self-made billionaire, or at least very close to it, has watched his entire financial life's work evaporate. We're looking at the final brutal chapter of a story that ends not with a diamond-encrusted toast, but with an empty bank account. Diddy has lost it completely. Let's go back to the height of the mountain he fell from at his financial peak. Sources estimated Diddy's wealth was approaching $1 billion. His empire was a fortress built on multiple towers. Bad Boy Records, the cornerstone, the massively lucrative profit-sharing partnership with Diageo for Cerac Vodka and Daily owned tequila. A deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars over its lifespan. The real crown jewel, Shah Jahan, the fashion line, Revolt TV, the media platform. He lived a life of excess that only the mega-rich can imagine. $65 million super yachts, a private jet named Love Air, multi-million-dollar mansions in Miami and Los Angeles, an art collection worth tens of millions.
Of racketeering cases, you tell a much more complete story in a RICO case. You don't just focus on a particular moment in time or a crime. You tell the whole story of this criminal enterprise, which lends itself to big forfeiture moments. And so it's not totally unusual to see it this broadly worded. What I think is a little unusual is it's not very specific in terms of any preliminary seizures. It looks like they haven't actually seized anything yet, even though they executed search warrants and looked for evidence of things. And so a lot of times you'll see listings in there of bank accounts, automobiles, jets, whatever, that the government has already preliminarily seized to make sure it's still going to be available at the time they do a forfeiture hearing. So this one, it's a blank slate, and it's blank enough where if you're the defense attorney and you get to this next phase, which by the way is supposed to be with the same jury, they may not know that yet, but that second phase would be one where you really would say to the judge, I don't have any notice here, Your Honor. This is so broadly worded, I need to particularize it, have a chance to digest it, and perhaps bring in expert testimony on both sides about kind of legitimate sources of income versus illegitimate ones.
And you mentioned that, they're also linking his company. So maybe that's his, record studio, or maybe that's, his vodka line. But how does something like a vodka line, how can that potentially even be mixed up with this? How can they say that that's linked to an alleged crime?
Yeah, it's really one of two or maybe even three ways. One is if there's somehow a tie-in where that property, that business was used to facilitate the freak-offs that are in the indictment, for instance, or obstructionist behavior. So if they literally used a record studio for a party and the record studio belonged to one of his companies, you could say that actually facilitated or was an instrumentality to support the criminal conduct. The other way is essentially if it is a proceed, if it was essentially built on money that comes from illegal activity. And then thirdly, and this is where it gets really crazy confusing, so I'll keep it short, sometimes there's something called substitute assets, where the government says, okay, we realize that particular asset, that car, that piece of art, was not actually bought by proceeds or served to contribute to the crime. But because we can't find enough to satisfy the overall amount we're owed, we're going to take it as a substitute asset. It's a very government-friendly area, this whole idea of federal forfeiture. And again, I think they're in a position where they might have their mitts on almost anything he's ever touched.
And how do they decide just that number that they're looking for? Is there kind of like a flat-out number that the government, when charging with these types of cases, that they say, hey, we're looking for 50 million, we're looking for 60 million? How do they decide how much?
Yeah, that's a great question. Look, that is an easier task in some circumstances where you have a fraud situation where you can tell the amount of victimization and say, well, look, it adds up to 2.5 million, and they put that in the forfeiture indictment. They don't have that here. In a drug case, for instance, you might say, well, they were responsible for 10 kilograms of cocaine, a kilogram's about 30,000, so we're looking for 3 million, do the math. Here, it's much more wide open. I think you're looking at an actual trial within a trial if we get to the forfeiture phase, where there's going to be experts saying this is money that's untouched by any sort of criminal enterprise from the defense side, and maybe a forensic auditor from the FBI saying, here's why we're entitled to all these types of proceeds or instruments. So it is a wide open battlefield. It's going to be kind of a textbook example of how deep the government tries to reach for forfeiture if they get to that point.
At what point does that kind of strategy from prosecutors become legally risky for them?
Lavish mogul, spending with reckless abandon because he believed the income stream was eternal. That belief was a lie. The entire foundation of his wealth was built on his reputation. A reputation that has now been shattered into a billion pieces. The moment the legal chaos began, the spending spree was exposed for what it was, a high-stakes, unsustainable burn of cash. The DIO deal, the financial engine, is dead, terminated. Its recurring multi-million-dollar annual payments, the lifeblood of his liquid wealth, are over. He lost the ability to control and profit from those flagship brands. This was not a business setback. It was an amputation of his main income source. Then came the legal costs, the absolute relentless, unyielding financial drain that has pushed his fortune past the point of no return. First, the immediate, massive multi-million-dollar settlement with Cassie Ventura, a clear admission of liability that opened the floodgates.
No.
You know, that's the thing. I mean, the court of public opinion every now and then turns on forfeiture. And, you know, the idea of forfeiture is that you don't want people to not just get away with crime, but profit from it. You know, being criminally prosecuted and put in prison doesn't mean that you've lost the assets. And so the idea is to kind of make things even, to hold people accountable, to not let them profit from criminal activity. But over time, you see abuses. You see situations where a person barely had a role in some sort of criminal conspiracy. I mean, literally was on the job for one day and is ordered to forfeit millions of dollars. And that bubbles up to the Supreme Court, where they say this is just not totally fair. So there are abuses of the forfeiture system that are seen from time to time. I think, look, if P. Diddy, if Sean Combs is convicted in this case, I don't think he's going to necessarily gin up a ton of sympathy. But there may be legal observers that say, hey, this is a broad, overreaching moment, you know, when they try to collect every single penny, that a guy who obviously had legitimate income over long periods of his life.
And for those that do say, hey, isn't this just a financial overreach? How do prosecutors justify that?
Yeah, I think they justify it by saying, in this case, they'll say, look, two things. Number one, we didn't disable him financially pre-trial. We haven't actually locked into his accounts and taken things and frozen things where it might even affect his ability to hire attorneys or hire experts. And secondly, they say, look, it's a criminal enterprise that extended for a number of years, that where he had financial profit from this kind of power and control over an enterprise. So I don't expect them to be apologetic. I mean, they may, you know, end up showing moments of moderation where they say, well, we're not going to go after this company or that company, but they've left it all on the table for now, where they can do a very broad, you know, deeply reaching process if they want to.
And Sean Combs, he's already sold one jet. The Beverly Hills mansion of his is on the market for $61 million or so. Does that seem like someone who is confident that they'll walk, or could that work for or against him in court?
It's probably not going to be anything that's particularly admissible during the trial. It could come up during the forfeiture just to show that, you know, his overall stock has dropped. I mean, I think he's down to his last 400 million. It's a real tough spot to be in. But you know, but I think at the end of the day, you really can't draw any firm conclusions. He knows he's got a battle of his life going on right now. I mean, this is a life-eligible racketeering case. Doesn't mean he'll necessarily get life. It's not a mandatory sentence. But, you know, if the facts continue to be established of years of abusive and controlling behavior, it paints a pretty dark picture for him in terms of sentencing.
And Sean Combs, he's now brought in Mr. Casella, someone who literally wrote the book on asset forfeiture. What's Casella's role likely to be here?
Well, you know, I worked with Steph at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Maryland for years. He is literally the expert on forfeiture. Whenever I have a situation in private practice where I have a question mark about forfeiture, that poor guy has to take my phone call. So he's a great pick. He knows what he's doing. He knows both the process and the law, which can be a little bit different sometimes. I think he's probably, you know, getting them prepared for the types of challenges. And by the way, I don't know this from him, but I would guess that he's basically figuring out what are the types of challenges we could raise in a forfeiture phase. What are the deficiencies in the government's approach? In other words, are they not discounting lawful employment by Sean Combs? And frankly, some of it could even relate to like how he's spending money right now. When you have a broad forfeiture allegations.
An avalanche of dozens of civil lawsuits, each one demanding eye-watering damages. We're talking about a reported $100 million default judgment already slapped against him in one case alone. The legal teams he has retained the best. The most expensive defense lawyers in the world don't work for free. Their fees day in and day out have been draining millions upon millions of dollars. This is a constant, unceasing financial hemorrhage. The cost of silence alone has been a fortune, and the cost of defense is even greater. This isn't just about paying lawyers. It's about the cash being spent on investigators, legal consultants, and court-mandated fines. He was just hit with a heavy fine on top of his prison sentence. He is literally paying a king's ransom justified a losing battle, and the costs are compounding daily. The remaining assets are being systematically sold off to fund the chaos. His stake in Revolt TV sold his massive legendary music catalog, while still valuable, has dropped.
Kind of hard to figure out. Are they saying that I can't get attorneys of my choosing because I'm using proceeds of criminal activity? So I think he's probably giving a lot of very sage guidance on how they walk through this process of dealing with a very broad, very deep, potentially deep-reaching forfeiture.
Since he is so knowledgeable, and since, I don't know if there's anyone who's more knowledgeable than him in this specific department, do you think that bringing him in may challenge the government's playbook at all?
I think it would certainly give them a moment of pause. Look, the reality is there's probably not a ton of time being spent worrying about forfeiture quite yet. They're probably figuring we'll get there when we get there. We got to try to get a conviction. But yeah, it's a shot across the bow. You see Steph Casella lining up on the other side, and you can say this about a lot of different type of expert witnesses and things where you say, wow, that's the king of DNA or the queen of forensic fingerprint recovery. So, I think it's a shot across the bow. They'll realize that they've got somebody that really knows their stuff on the other side, but that doesn't necessarily mean they change their approach in any way at this point.
And there's this idea of facilitating property, that a business or maybe an item helped enable a crime. How direct does that link need to be?
Yeah, we should ask Steph. But, yeah, that's a great question. You have to be able to show, a significant link. It can't be just like this 6 steps removed kind of thing. Like there was a bottle of liquor that happened to be on the bar during one of these assaults, and he owns a liquor company, so therefore, the liquor, we can presume, facilitated the crime. You're going to have some, quantum of proof that's deeper than that. But it's very fact specific. And again, that's why I think you're probably looking, even though a lot of times forfeiture becomes a very small afterthought to a criminal trial, this one really has the potential to be a completely independent kind of mini trial, delving into his finances, delving into issues just like that, like how well connected can the government make these instrumentalities, these facilitating pieces of property. I think it's, inherently pretty difficult. But again, if you use a location, that's a little bit easier. If you say, I'm going to use my liquor company headquarters, or I'm going to use a record business studio to have one of these freak-offs, that becomes a much tougher climb for the defense to get out of it as an instrumentality. It's these kind of third time removed ones where they might have some success.
And like how you said, we're not just talking about past behavior here. Prosecutors say that this was ongoing. Does that make asset recovery just a little bit easier for them?
Yeah, in general, I'd say yes. Because you're talking about a period of years, and you're going to have, during these trials, you're going to have very specific stories from witnesses that say, I was there when X happened at this particular location. But you're probably going to get broad characterizations too. Like he would always, use his liquor to get people drunk before these freak-offs, or there were times where we met and discussed how we were going to do this at office X or home Y, or how planes were used. It might not be a specific moment, but he might have somebody that says, I was at the airport when his private plane brought prostitutes here. So you might not have the precision that you'd have with kind of a single event trial, but you're probably going to have pretty significant stories that, again, tie these properties into the possibility of being forfeited.
How much of a role does public perception play here? Have we seen the DOJ make strategic decisions based on headlines?
Well, overall, sure. We could probably point to all sorts of cases that you could, I think, fairly characterize as a little bit of trophy hunting, where the Department of Justice or even non-federal
in market value because a toxic name is attached to it. His fashion line Sean John is commercially finished. The entire business empire, which once generated hundreds of millions in annual revenue, is now non-performing. His personal assets, the ultimate symbols of his lavish spending, are now liability. The luxury real estate, the sprawling homes in Los Angeles and Miami are being put up for sale or stand exposed to massive potential asset seizure to pay for the massive civil judgments that are still pending. The market knows he is desperate. His assets are selling at a discount. He is being forced into a fire sale just to keep up with the next round of legal bills. Then came the legal chaos, the unceasing, escalating, unprecedented financial drain that has proven to be the death blow. It started with the massive multi-million-dollar settlement with Cassie Ventura, a move designed to stop the bleeding that instead became the flare that attracted the sharks. Dozens of civil lawsuits followed, one after the other, each one demanding a colossal payout.
In this crowd, and then my father was like waiting by the door, and he grabbed me, dropped me, and we fell to the floor. He said, "They got him, Jay. It's just us, man." You know, because I grew up, my father was a single father, even though my mother was very much in our lives, but he was our primary, parent. And he was so pissed, and we were in front of the gym, then we went into the library, and it became official.
It's so awful the way you describe it. Like, I'm visualizing it happening, and I know it's not easier. And I'm wondering, in the aftermath of it, trying to make sense of what happened here. You see the response from city officials, you see the response from the police, you see the response from the mayor when they look into it and they investigate it. What did you think of that response? What did you think of the investigation?
At that time, I didn't understand. I still didn't understand what happened. I couldn't get it, and no one was really, no one was taking accountability for anything that went wrong. It seemed criminal, but it didn't go that route. It was obvious that it was overbooked because my brother died with his ticket in his pocket, and no one even ripped it. They were still selling tickets.
Really?
Yeah. Yep. They went in, they were waiting at the bottom of the steps. My brother's friends didn't get a chance to buy a ticket. They just got in, and there were people still outside, and you'll see that in my documentary, people holding up their ticket and they can't get in. So, but they were still selling tickets at the door, just didn't make sense. And I don't know officially, really, how it was, I guess any evidence to show that it was overbooked. It was just, in my eyes, it seemed overbooked, but I'm sure the officials figured that out. But the rumor was that it sold out a week before because the radio was really blasting it, like I said earlier, that was the place to be.
Yeah, we were talking about it before. Do you have any idea why those doors were closed at the bottom of the stairs?
Someone closed them, and I believe certain people said it was Jessica Rosenblum, who was at the front door, Sean potentially, but I think they were at risk of thinking people were going to rush the door anyway because they said that it's over, no one else is getting in, and people weren't having that, especially people who had tickets. So someone closed the door, and, they closed the door without understanding or, I guess, helping the people. There were about, 50 or less people in the staircase waiting to get in.
Yeah.
Celebrities, there were hip-hop celebrities there that were with 3 people who passed away. So they should have been in or gone through the back. LL Cool J should have went through the back. There was no, just imagine a celebrity today walking through the crowd of an event, and then they go in. Now the crowd is really excited, even more excited.
Yeah.
And that's the way it was. People will walk right in from the front, past the crowd, and then they won't let anyone in. And there was lack of security.
Disaster.
Yeah.
What role do you think Sean Combs plays in this?
I think he was like I would say the primary promoter. And,
Talking about liabilities that quickly surpassed the hundreds of millions. Reports indicate at least one $100 million default judgment has been slapped against him. This is not chump change. This is the price of an entire major corporation. To fight this, he had to hire the absolute top-tier defense lawyers in the world. Their retainer fees alone are in the tens of millions. Their monthly bills are in the millions. He's in a legal war of attrition, and he is paying for every single bullet. He's paying for the defense teams, the private investigators, the PR specialists, the security, all while generating virtually zero income. His other business assets annihilated. His majority stake in Revolt TV sold off for a cash injection. Sean John, the fashion line, finished commercially, no longer a factor. The music catalog, while still technically valuable on paper, the market for it is toxic. Who wants to buy a piece of a legacy that is currently in flames? Any potential sale would be.
He knows how to get a crowd, even then. He knows how to get people to come to a party. And I think he was a party promoter. That was his thing at that time, besides the internship label stuff he was doing. There were 10 defendants, so I can't always, and this is my mother who said this, God bless her, there were 10 defendants. So you can't just point the finger directly at him, but he was the one who paid the money to Cassandra Kieran, I think that's her name, in student government, $1,200 to rent the gym. Then he just called everybody, or called his friend to call his friend, celebrities, and put their names. We're gonna do a basketball game. And it sounded fun. I believe if no one passed away, it would have been a great event.
Right.
For $12, in advance, $20 at the door, but.
What did you make of his response afterwards?
He really didn't say much. Yeah. I've met him a few times, but I didn't like, he said something in a rap song that my mother was, she's in the newspaper speaking on it, but it didn't make sense, because we never really heard him say he apologized for being the promoter, and being found liable. He was still like, and he said it wasn't overbooked. He said that in an E-True story thing. And it just didn't make sense. At first I was really pissed off. I was young, I was a teenager trying to find my way. But then, I kind of fell back with, that type of thing. Just being mad at one person wasn't really the way to go.
Well, you've produced this documentary series, as I said, No Way Out. What's the purpose behind it? What do you want people to remember about this? Because I'll tell you, with so much going on with Sean Combs now, on one hand, you could say things get lost, people don't remember. On the other hand, he's got a spotlight on him. People now look back a little bit of the things that he was involved in. What are you hoping with this series? What are you hoping through the years to bring more attention to this story? What's the hope?
Just want to give a voice to the nine people who were killed. They were amazing people. We do a memorial every year at City College at the staircase. No one's covered it till this year that just passed. And so I started doing it. And what I wanted was just to give them a voice and just remember them, understand them. So I've done a documentary. It was kind of a rough draft, and some schools used it to educate you on crowd control and stuff like that. But we're doing a part 2, and what I want is to understand, like, what did you see? Talk to some of the celebrities that were there, talk to some of the eyewitnesses, because it just should never happen again.
Yeah.
They were crushed in the staircase, and it wasn't just Sean's fault. It wasn't just the security's fault. It was also the people who were pushing, because they didn't know that the doors were pushing this, actually open towards them instead of going into the gym. So there were a lot of people at the top of the stairs.
At a discounted fire sale price. He's already using his most treasured luxury properties, the ones he paraded on social media, as collateral. He tried to use his Miami home for a $50 million bail bond. His Los Angeles mansion is reportedly up for sale at a discounted price, not because he wants to make a profit, but because he needs liquid cash right now to fund the next round of lawyers. This is the definition of financial desperation, selling your prized possessions at a loss just to cover debt. The current estimated net worth of Diddy sits around $400 million, a massive plunge from his peak. But you have to understand the difference between net worth and liquid wealth. Net worth is assets on paper. Liquid wealth is cash to pay bills. His liabilities, the guaranteed costs of settlements, the projected mass of civil judgments, and the relentless legal fees have already exceeded his liquid cash and are now eating into the value of his hard assets. When the debt owed is greater than the total value of everything you own, your fortune is zero. But that's over. The underscore deal is dead, gone, finished. The main engine of his wealth has been disconnected. When you lose the core source of your liquid income, the rest is just a ticking clock. And while he received a reported buyout of $200 million for his daily owned stake, that money wasn't a windfall. It was a massive one-time payment that has since been devoured by the legal monster he created. The reality is simple. His fortune is no longer a fortune. Sources estimate his current net worth sits in the high hundreds of millions, which is a massive loss. But with the pending liabilities, the looming civil judgments, and the absolute termination of his primary income streams, his available liquid wealth is dwindling to nothing. He is no longer a mogul commanding markets. He is a man watching his checking account flatline. The hundreds of millions of dollars in pending civil judgments alone are now more than his remaining net worth. The debt has officially surpassed the assets. The lavish spending of his past, the parties, the gifts, the excessive purchases, didn't just look good on camera. It emptied the vault. Now, combined with the catastrophic legal expenses and the total loss of all major business deals, Diddy has nothing left to leverage. Music, he has no income, a destroyed reputation, years of debt ahead, and a tidal wave of liabilities closing in. His time is over, his power is gone, his name is toxic, and his fortune has hit zero. This is the final undisputed truth of Sean Diddy Combs' complete and total financial downfall. The man who wanted everything now has absolutely nothing but the crushing weight of his accountability.